Imagine a massive 5,000-ton destroyer gleaming under North Korea's banner, set to prove the regime's naval might. On a crisp morning, crowds gathered, confetti at the ready, but within moments of launch, this symbol of strength lurched, tipped, and lay half submerged, a twisted emblem of failed ambition. As Kim Jong Un watched in stunned silence, the hull's rust met the waves. What went so horribly wrong? Buckle up, because this is the story of pride, pressure, and a ship that simply refused to sail. On May 21st, North Korea rolled out the red carpet, or more accurately, a rusty iron ramp, for what was billed as a show-stopping moment of national pride. In the chilly air of Chongjin, an old port city on the country's northeastern coast where they normally build fishing boats and small cargo vessels, workers and military brass gathered to celebrate a big milestone: the launch of their new Chu Haiyan-class warship. This was no small fishing trawler or supply boat. At about 470 feet long and tipping the scales around 5,000 tons, this destroyer was the biggest warship Pyongyang had ever built. If all went well, it would stand as proof that North Korea could step up its naval game and show off a bit of real military muscle. Kim Jong Un himself flew in for the grand occasion. He stood on a makeshift viewing platform about 40 meters from the launch ramp, flanked by uniformed officers who practically glowed under the high-profile spotlight. Local officials, eager to impress, took turns praising the invincible might of their navy, assuring everyone that this new destroyer would sail off into the East Sea and make rivals tremble. Workers dressed in matching dark green uniforms snapped crisp salutes, and cameras clicked furiously as technicians gave final thumbs-ups to bolts and pulleys. You could practically taste the pride in the air. Every cheer and every flash of a camera was meant to signal, "Look at us, we're on the rise." But behind all the pomp and circumstance, things were already shaky. Outside observers had noted that North Korean shipyards had never before tried something like this: a sideways launch for a warship. Most shipyards around the world opt to slide a vessel straight down a slipway into the water, using carefully calculated angles and support guides to keep everything balanced. Here in Chongjin, though, engineers chose to push the massive hull off the dock sideways. It's a tricky move even for yards with decades of experience. One small miscalculation in angle or buoyancy, and the whole ship can go off kilter. The day dawned clear, with calm seas reflecting the morning sun. Workers lined the dock's edge, fists raised in the air, ready to roar with approval. Kim Jong Un and his entourage took their places, and for a moment it felt as if nothing could possibly go wrong. The announcer counted down. 3, 2, 1, launch! Instead of a smooth, controlled descent into the harbor, the destroyer shuddered. Its keel slipped unevenly, and the hull dipped too rapidly on one side. Within seconds, the massive vessel listed sharply, water poured over its deck, and the destroyer rolled onto its port side, half submerged in the harbor before anyone could blink. Gasps echoed among the crowd. Kim Jong Un's face went from triumphant pride to a pained wince. Guards rushed to block cameras while alarmed officials scrambled to control the scene. Satellite images and videos appeared almost instantly online, showing exactly what had happened. A 5,000-ton warship, its sleek radar towers and missile hatches brand new, lying helplessly on its side. Instead of sailing into open water, it sat tipped over like a beached whale. Within days, North Korean state-run media tried to put a spin on it, but word was already out. This sideways launch had failed spectacularly. Experts from outside quickly pointed fingers. In a report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, analysts said it was clear the Chongjin shipyard had no business trying to launch such a massive vessel this way. That yard normally handles small fishing boats and modest cargo ships. Never something as complex as a destroyer, bristling with weapons and electronics. Without the right infrastructure and know-how, using a sideways launch technique was simply asking for trouble. Back home, the fallout was swift and severe. North Korean authorities arrested 3 shipyard officials, among them the chief engineer and a senior munitions officer, blaming them for the criminal act of letting the ship capsize. Rumors spread that more heads would roll as Kim Jong Un made it clear he considered this fiasco nothing short of treason. Workers who had spent months welding steel plates, fitting engines, and installing radar systems watched in horror as their creations sank. The hull, once a symbol of pride, became a twisted monument to a miscalculation born of inexperience and political pressure to deliver fast. Satellite shots taken just 3 days before the accident had shown the gleaming hull perched on its launch ramp, looking every bit the symbol of strength the regime wanted. Instead, those images now stood as proof that ambition had far outstripped ability. And for a leader who insists on perfection, this public failure was nothing less than total humiliation. As whispered conversations passed between ordinary citizens, despite strict attempts to censor the truth, one fact became painfully clear. The shipyard undoubtedly lacked expertise in manufacturing and launching large warships. The ill-fated warship that toppled in Chongjin wasn't just any random vessel, it was essentially the same size and design as the Choe Haiyan guided missile destroyer. That first Choe Haiyan was a huge deal, North Korea's very first destroyer and by far the most powerful surface ship the country has ever built. In fact, it was the crown jewel of Kim Jong Un's big strategy to modernize and bulk up his Soviet-era naval fleet. Just last month, the Choe Haiyan got its very own star treatment in Nampo, a port on the west coast close to Pyongyang, complete with speeches, confetti, and fireworks. State television showed all the glitz and glamour. Kim Jong Un and his daughter, Kim Ju-ae, were front and center, waving as the new destroyer floated proudly in the harbor. A massive viewing platform had been erected right next to the ship so the cameras could capture every angle. Reporters and uniformed officers cheered as the Choe Haiyan slid smoothly into the water, its steel hull glistening under the Nampo sun. It looked flawless, no drama, no hiccups. Every part of the ship seemed to work exactly as planned, and the crowd erupted into applause. It was clear this ship was supposed to be Kim's shining example of North Korea's naval renaissance. How did they manage to pull that off? According to Choi Il, a retired South Korean Navy captain who keeps a close eye on these things, the engineers in Nampo used the common floating dry dock method. Essentially, they built the Choe Haiyan inside a roof construction hall, protected from the elements, with better control over every weld, bolt, and engine install. Once the ship was complete, they hauled it out into the water on a floating dry dock. Then, by allowing water to flood the dry dock chamber, the ship gently floated free. It's a tried and true way to do it, safe, controlled, and less likely to end in disaster. Chongjin shipyard, on the other hand, didn't have those same bells and whistles. There was no dry dock big enough to hold a Choe Haiyan-class destroyer, and there wasn't even a proper incline to slide the ship stern first into the water. Instead, engineers in Chongjin built their newest 5,000-tonner right on the quay, under a protective netting, basically out in the open. When it came time to launch, they had no choice but to send it sideways off the platform. That's basically like trying to push a massive, heavy log off a pier instead of easing it in head first. You can see where this was headed. When sailors and shipbuilders want everything to go just right, they make the vessel glide down a slipway lengthwise, bow, then stern, easing into the water in one smooth, graceful motion. Picture the USS Cleveland, a 3,500-ton warship that did its own launch in Wisconsin back in 2023. Out in the Great Lakes, they built the Cleveland on land, moved it carefully to a sloped ramp, and sent it straight down into the chilly water. There was a brief moment where it seemed to dive gracefully in, sending a wake into the lake, and then bobbing upright as the hull caught the water's support. The whole process looks almost poetic, a massive ship built piece by piece finally meeting the water with a quick but controlled splash. By contrast, the Chongjin technique was like attempting to drop that same 3,500-ton ship into a bathtub sideways. An obviously trickier affair. Without a dry dock, without a slipway, and without years of experience launching vessels that size, they resorted to a sideways push. In most established shipyards around the world, that method isn't unheard of. You see it for certain types of vessels, but it demands absolute precision. The way the piers are built, the way the supports are angled, and even the timing of when the water meets each part of the hull all have to be absolutely perfect. Any misstep sends the center of gravity off kilter, and gravity basically tumbles the ship over. The sunk destroyer in Chongjin proved just how difficult this technique can be when you aren't set up right. Without the proper incline or the specialized dry dock, they couldn't guide the hull smoothly. Instead, the massive mast slid unevenly, dipped too far, and in seconds the whole thing listed over. Water gushed over the side, filling compartments and dragging it down. The proud vessel, with its missile launchers still under wraps and radar dishes pointed skyward, as if frozen mid-sway, ended up half-submerged like a beached whale. It all happened so fast that by the time anyone realized what was happening, there was no turning back. Of course, experts outside North Korea wasted no time picking apart the failures in Chongjin. Building a warship as big as the Choehyun guided missile destroyer is no small feat. It takes decades of know-how, carefully engineered facilities, and experience launching vessels into the water just right. Chongjin's yard was built for much smaller work: cargo ships, fishing boats, things that weigh a fraction of 5,000 tons. Trying to slide a vessel of that size sideways without a proper ramp was like setting yourself up to fail from the get-go. And yet political pressure ran high. Kim Jong Un wanted tangible proof of his naval ambitions, something to show off to the world and to his own people. So they rushed. Politicians demanded results. The shipbuilders, under pressure to deliver, cut corners. And in the end, that spectacular ceremony in Chongjin turned into the most embarrassing naval moment North Korea has ever seen. If only they'd had the infrastructure, if only they'd built the boat in a dry dock, like in Nampo, or slid it in bow first like the USS Cleveland did in Wisconsin back in 2023. The difference between those two launches, even though they were the same basic idea, comes down to one thing: experience and proper facilities. Often when a giant warship slides into the water, a tugboat waits nearby to help if anything goes wrong. It's like a safety net under a trapeze artist. It shouldn't interfere, but if the ship starts to tip, the tug can steady it. For North Korea's second Hyun-class destroyer, however, the tugboat couldn't prevent disaster. State media later admitted that as engineers pushed the destroyer into the harbor, it lost its balance. Instead of floating upright, it lurched and began to tip. Satellite images 2 days after the accident revealed the wreck. The warship lay on its right side under a blue tarp, its bow jammed against the launch ramp and stern dangling over the water. Any casual observer could see the ship had failed to launch properly. The viewing platform where Kim Jong Un and his officers had gathered was gone, removed as if to hide the embarrassment. Satellite snapshots show one image with the ship upside down and another with a small tugboat idling nearby, seemingly ashamed to be part of the scene. The sight conveyed the magnitude of the failure without a single word, broadcasting North Korea's setback globally. Launching a large warship sideways demands precise balance, explains retired South Korean Navy Captain Choi Il. From engine weight to radar antenna placement, every component must be calculated. Adding heavy weapons, anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air systems, torpedo tubes, shifts the center of gravity and complicates stability. If anything is even slightly off, water flows in unevenly, listing the hull until the destroyer lies on its side like a toppled toy. Just weeks earlier in Nampo, the first Choehyun-class destroyer had launched smoothly under confetti and fireworks. Kim Jong Un watched as the ship floated off a dry dock, engines roaring, test-firing missiles that arced bright orange into the sky. Officials hailed it as proof that North Korea's aging Soviet-era fleet was being reborn, stronger and more modern. Kim, visibly thrilled, toured shipyards and pushed engineers to accelerate naval expansion. "Get it done fast," he urged, wanting the world to know North Korea's resolve. That pressure can be a double-edged sword. In Nampo, engineers had a modern dry dock and a covered hull to build a warship out of the elements. In Chongjin, they worked at an open-air facility accustomed to fishing boats and cargo vessels, not 5,000-ton missile destroyers. Without overhead cover, construction could halt for weather, forcing work into unpredictable conditions. South Korean analysts say Chongjin engineers likely felt intense pressure after Nampo's success. It's like being asked to bake an equally perfect cake in a kitchen, missing half its tools. Under such strain, they may have rushed weight calculations or lacked materials to reinforce the hull correctly. When political pressure meets limited resources, mistakes become almost inevitable. Corners were probably cut at every stage, from keel laying to final assembly. After the capsizing, state media downplayed the incident. "We will restore the ship's balance by pumping out seawater," broadcast claimed. They promised to repair any dents and have the destroyer upright in a few days. According to official statements, the blue tarp was merely precautionary, and the crew would fix scratches quickly. However, satellite images suggest the damage ran deeper than a simple patch job. Yang Uk, a North Korean military expert at the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies, noted the sideways launch system appeared flawed, but that alone might not explain everything. "The ship looks twisted after the accident," he said. "It doesn't appear to have been built with the structural strength required for a warship. Such defects might render it unusable unless extensive reconstruction is undertaken. A warship's hull must flex to handle waves while remaining rigid enough to resist twisting or sagging. If the frame is weak, even a minor tilt during launch can lead to catastrophic failure as water floods in." For the Chongjin-built destroyer, limited facilities, intense political pressure, and possibly subpar construction combined to produce a total collapse, robbing the Navy of a second frontline vessel. After the destroyer tipped on its side, panic rippled through the top ranks of Pyongyang. Before long, news surfaced that a fourth high-level figure had been dragged into the fallout. Ri Hyong-sun, a deputy director in the Workers' Party's munitions department. Think of him as one of the masterminds behind North Korea's weapons programs. He sits on the Central Military Commission, which is like the general's boardroom, where all the big military decisions are hashed out. Having someone at that level arrested shows just how furious Kim Jong Un was. Nothing less than an earth-shattering scandal in their eyes. Ri wasn't the only one to lose his freedom. Over the weekend, authorities rounded up 3 more men at the Chongjin shipyard: the chief engineer, who oversaw the blueprints and machinery, the construction head, who managed the day-to-day building work, and an administrative manager, the person in charge of budgets, schedules, and paperwork. All 3 had a hand in putting that 5,000-ton destroyer together. Now they're paying the price as a warning to anyone else who might blow it next time. Even North Korea's usually guarded state media couldn't hide its anger. Reports described the disaster as a result of absolute carelessness, irresponsibility, and unscientific empiricism. A polite way of saying the officials treated serious naval engineering like child's play. They didn't bother with careful calculations or proper procedures, so things went south fast. Exact punishments are never spelled out, but history tells us that when the regime points a finger, it's not just a slap on the wrist. Forced labor camps, or worse, often come next. This kind of public shaming is unusual. North Korea almost never broadcasts its own mistakes. When a missile falls back to Earth or a satellite doesn't reach orbit, they might quietly sweep the wreckage under the rug or spin it as a grand success. But here, the whole fiasco was laid bare for everyone to see. Analysts say that blasting these names through state channels is Kim's way of signaling 2 things at once: that he demands perfection and that no one, no matter how high up, is untouchable. Watching from outside the regime, experts saw Kim's crackdown as more than just vengeance. To them, it was a statement. North Korea will press ahead with its naval ambitions, and it will brook no failure. In most countries, if a warship capsizes during launch, engineers would quietly fix the problem, maybe keep it under wraps. But in Pyongyang, turning the blame into a political purge makes the stakes crystal clear. Admiral-level officers and factory chiefs know they're under a microscope. Veteran observers of North Korea's military are surprised at how openly state media aired this drama. Usually, everything in the news is about glowing victories. Negative reports, especially anything that might embarrass Kim, are banished or rewritten. Here, though, the regime let loose with harsh criticism of its own people. A few think this is a sign of unshakable confidence. By publicly laying out everyone's failures, Kim might be showing that he's not afraid of exposing weaknesses in his own system. As if to say, "See how tough I am? You can't fool me." Michael Madden, a seasoned North Korea watcher based in Washington, saw another side of the story. He noted that this whole mess may have come down to one simple fact. They were trying to do way too much all at once, pushing out a megaship, packing it with advanced weaponry, and expecting a smooth launch with a ticking deadline. That's a recipe for disaster. Under Kim's orders, engineers and workers were racing against a clock that probably didn't leave time for double-checking every weld or testing every mechanism. Instead of steady, meticulous work, they had to rush, cut corners, and hope for the best. Put all those pieces together and you get a classic case of too big, too fast. When engineers in Nampo launched the first Choi Hyun destroyer a month earlier, they had a dry dock, a covered hull to build in, and a more relaxed timeline. Everything went off without a hitch because they could control every detail. In Chongjin, though, they were missing the fancy facilities. The only way to shove that massive hull into the water was to push it sideways, with no dry dock and no proper ramp. Add political pressure on top of dodgy equipment, and you end up with a 5,000-ton warship laying on its side, half sunk in the harbor. Now, North Korea's latest effort to salvage its flipped destroyer looks like something straight out of a cartoon. Dozens of huge white balloons tethered around the half-submerged hull, keeping it from slipping deeper into the water. Satellite pictures show these oversized blobs floating alongside the ship, which is still lying on its side and covered in blue tarps. A desperate attempt to hide a major embarrassment for Kim Jong Un. At first glance, those white balloons look more like floating sausages than a serious solution. But specialists believe they're not just for show, because the ship's front end is jammed against the dock and the back is dragging down. Trying to lift it normally might crack the hull or cause more flooding. Instead, these buoyant balloons, similar in concept to blimps but designed to work underwater, are probably there to hold the destroyer in place, taking some of the weight off the damaged sections so workers can patch holes and pump out water without the whole vessel slipping further. You can almost imagine a crew tying life vests around a sinking rowboat. These floating aids create extra lift, raising the sunken areas just enough for repairs. If they'd tried the usual method, raising the ship from below with cranes or a massive cradle, it could have stressed the weakened steel, causing cracks or bending that might be impossible to mend. By gently holding the hull in limbo, the balloons give repair teams a bit of breathing room. Still, even this clever trick may not be enough. A top expert in naval forces pointed out that the destroyer is likely under tremendous strain. Metal warps and bends when it's twisted or forced into strange positions, and this ship has been on its side for days. Parts of the deck might be caved in, and water could have sucked into areas that were never meant to be exposed. So even if the balloons keep it afloat, fixing the structural damage is a massive challenge. On top of that, we don't yet know how much worse things got when a cradle on the back of the ship detached during the launch. That cradle would normally support the vessel as it slid into the harbor, but it apparently gave way too soon, contributing to the catastrophic tilt. If that cradle tore off metal plates or dislodged critical support beams, it might have opened up gaping holes in the hull. Patching those would mean working underwater or inside flooded compartments, both risky and time-consuming tasks. Workers have to fight against time and tide. The colder water pressing against the hull could speed up corrosion, and every tide cycle might bring in more silt and debris that could clog pumps or block access points. Mud and grime can act like sandpaper, grinding against damaged steel and making repairs even tougher. Meanwhile, anyone standing on the deck to inspect damage risks slipping or falling if the hull suddenly shifts beneath their feet. Using balloons also introduces its own headaches. Each one has to be pumped with a lifting gas, probably helium or something similar, to generate enough buoyancy. The gas tanks, hoses, and pumps must all work perfectly. A single leak could mean losing lift in a critical area. And the rough sea conditions often found in that part of the Korean coast can make balloons bob up and down, stretching the tether lines and creating unpredictable forces against the ship. Every gust of wind or burst of current could tug the hull in a new direction, threatening to rip off a repair patch or collapse a temporary support. Beyond the engineering nightmare, there's a political sting here. North Korea has spent years promoting its newer warships as symbols of rising naval power. Now, instead of parades and fireworks, they have a flopped hull and a swarm of balloons holding it together. Every day that ship remains out of commission is a day that Kim Jong Un's grand naval plans are delayed. Plus, rivals watching the satellite images will quietly note just how fragile this ambitious push really is. Despite the drama, repair crews probably have no choice but to keep at it. If they can stabilize the ship enough, it might be possible to tow it back to a dry dock, if one big enough exists, or haul it ashore on a specially built cradle. Only then could engineers peel back the tarps, weld new steel plates, and test the hull's integrity. But that's assuming they have the materials, tools, and expertise to do critical shipyard work under extreme pressure. Given the way things went during the launch, it's hard to bet on a smooth fix.